What is up, everybody? Gary Simon here. So today we are going to be continuing on a series about animation. Earlier in the year, I released a video where I said the biggest trend that we're going to see here in 2022 is just more animation, more awesome animation being integrated into user interfaces. So we're going to take a look at this example right here. Now, if you visited the website and this is exactly as it is with no animation, yeah, it looks nice and that's fine. But what if you wanted to do something like this? How exactly would you do this? And that's exactly what I'm going to be showing you today. So at skillform.io, this is also an announcement for me because a partner and I, the same partner who helped code DesignCourse.com, we are creating a new SaaS, or software as a service, where we're going to be competing with sites like Teachable.com and Podia, where people like me who create courses can actually be able to establish online courses easily with a platform. And so we're gonna kill it here later in 2022. So if you're interested in teaching, actually go to skillform.io and enter your email to be notified when it releases. And then that way, if you're interested in teaching, making money, or perhaps a living online doing the type of things that I do, you'll be able to use our platform. All right, so anyhow, enough of that shameless plug there. So yeah, we're gonna be using GSAP, which is the Greenstock Animation Platform. And it makes doing this sort of thing actually really easy, because if you had to do this completely custom in CSS with such a complex animation sequence, it would take forever and be very difficult. GSAP makes that easy. So I'm going to show you from start to finish how to do this. Make sure to subscribe and let's get started. Oh, and also, if you're interested in learning more about CSS and making really cool layouts and such, then definitely check out DesignCourse.com/CSS. It's here in the top link of the YouTube description, and enter your email to be notified when this releases. I know I'm collecting emails like crazy, but this is going to be releasing here sometime mid-2022, and it's going to be an interactive and fun way to learn CSS using the same platform as DesignCourse.com, which of course, if you go there, you can learn UI UX right now. So anyhow, I'll stop the damn spam and let's get started. All right, so here is all the HTML, and don't worry, we're gonna go over it very quickly. At this point, make sure you go to the Codepen in the YouTube description, copy the HTML and the CSS, and create the same exact folder structure. So just an index.html, copy and paste all that HTML. You're gonna have to put the boilerplate code first, and what I mean by that is here in Visual Studio Code, just put exclamation point enter, and then copy and paste all the stuff in the middle. Also make sure you get, we're going to be importing these Google fonts right here. So I'll try to remember to include that as well in the Codepen. And then also finally, CSS main.css. So create a CSS folder with a main.sass file. That's what I'm using here. And paste that sass in from the Codepen as well in here. Now you're gonna have to have some sort of way to compile the sass though into main.css. I use the live sass compiler. So I just hit watch sass after installing that plugin over here. And then finally, right click, open with live server. You'll also need the live server plugin. And once we do that, we'll see this. So why is it not showing up? Why are only some of the things showing up? Well, that's because in GSAP, we're using a method called to in some of these. So it's going from this value where you can't see hardly anything to what we're eventually going to specify. So that's why right here, it's just kind of strange looking. All right, but if it looks like this, that's solid. Okay, so real quick, I'll do a real quick overview of the HTML structure here. We just have an overall wrapper wrapping everything. We have a header just for the logo itself. Usually you would have a navigation, but there's no navigation for this purpose of the site because there's nothing there yet. We have a main section, and inside of here, we have the hero section, which is a two-column approach. The first column is this H1, and then a div class form, which is the right-aligned email submission or collection section. Then we also have the portion underneath the hero section, which is the features section, which is a four-column layout with 4 different cards. All right, and then down here we have the footer, and we have a two-column approach, and that is going to be right here. At least on desktop, it's two-column approach. On mobile, it's collapsed. We have a little angle bracket icon pointing to all of this right here, and then we also have the social media section. Learn more by following us in one column. The next column is going to be a link going to Twitter and the username. Okay, so that's essentially it for the CSS. Oh, let me get rid of that. We don't want that up there. All right, and for the HTML I meant. For the CSS itself, I'm not really going to go through. It's all pretty standard stuff. However, I will say that I am using the clip path property to animate a lot of these. Some of you know I'm a fan of clip path, and we'll be animating in GSAP as well from these values. This is what's hiding a lot of the things, because this is a this is actually a rectangle that has been collapsed. So that's why you don't see the elements there on some of these. And so you also see I'm scaling certain things, and it all makes sense once we gradually start to build out the GSAP. Also, the little dots that are showing up here, right there, it's important to know that those are achieved by pseudo elements, the before selector. And if I show you that real quickly, let's take a look at that. Here's the code for that. We're just making a circle with border radius 100%. We have the border, we have a background, that's that color right there, and we're just kind of positioning it in. All right, and the reason it's important to know that is because GSAP itself doesn't have access directly in the core library to be able to animate that. So we're gonna have to import a plugin to animate a before or after element. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. The first thing we need to do is we need to import GSAP itself, the library. So we're gonna go to Google and type in GSAP3 CDN. And right there. And we're just gonna copy this one right here, copy script tag, leave this page up, we're gonna come right back to it, and we're gonna put it right here before the closing body tag. Get out of the way, all right. And then also, we're going to put just after that, Jesus, get into the right section, the CSS rule plugin. All right, that's what's going to give us the ability to animate that pseudo element. All right, so just those two. And then, let me make this a little bit larger for everybody. We're going to just do our inline JavaScript at the bottom here. All right, so in order to get started, we need to create an instance of the GSAP timeline. All right, so the timeline is for creating sequence animations, like where you want to have multiple things happening at the same time. So we're going to say let timeline, or TL for timeline, gsap.timeline, and you could just go ahead and do this, or if you want to override any of the default parameters, which you can look up on a GSAP3 documentation, what we can do is put in defaults and then also another object, and then we could put in, we could override the default easing. So ease, we'll say is power 4 in out. And then we're also going to overwrite the default duration to 2 seconds. All right, so the easing power 4 in out, where do you find that at? I've talked about this before, but assuming you're new to GSAP, we're going to go to GSAP 3 easings. And they have a cool little documentation page that shows you how each of the easings occur. So this is power 4 ease out, and you can check all these other crazy things. I mean, this is how your animations will be applied, like this crazy rough one. So you have a lot of options, and it gives you the code beneath. So that's where I got that from. Additionally, we're going to have access. We're going to need access to our little, I call them flagpoles, and essentially that is the circles that I was just talking about. If we go back here, we don't need this anymore. These things, those little dots, we're going to call those flagpoles. So we're going to say let flagpoles equals, and this is where we're going to use the CSS rule plugin. So we're going to say CSS rule plugin get rule, and we're going to say card before. So that's how you use this plugin. Every pseudo element, you have to define a variable which calls CSS rule, the get rule plugin, or method rather, the get rule method, and then we target the actual element with the selector that we want to choose. So in this case, it's before, it could be after, or whatever. And then that's it. So now, this in and of itself, of course, does nothing. Now we have to actually use our timeline. So for our timeline, we're going to say the first thing that we want to show up, the first thing that we want to animate is going to be their headline. All right, so we're going to say TL, we could either use to or from method. So if you're going to, think about it like this way. if you're using 2, it's going to take whatever the default values currently are specified in CSS, and it's going to animate them to the values you're about to specify in this 2 method. Okay, if you're going from, it works opposite of that. You're going to go from the values that are specified inside of the animation parameters you're about to put in the from method. It's going to go from those to whatever is defined by default in CSS. So there's use cases for both. We're going to use both of them. So we're going to say h1. So for to in from method, the first parameter of that method is always going to be the selector. You tell which selector you want to animate. Then we put a comma, and then we open up an object where we put the parameters. So for us, we're going to put in here, and we're going to put clip-path. Now, if you put them in semicolons, I just realized this recently, you can actually put the CSS property as is. If you want to omit those semicolons, you could put clip, and then you have to omit any hyphens that exist in the property, the CSS property that is, and put camel case instead, like clip-path. So either one's up to you, clip-path. And right here is where we put the clip path property. So by default for our h1 value, if we scroll up here, has a clip path property right here. And just to show you, in case you're new to this, is we're going to go to type in CSS Clippy, and that's a little tool called Clippy. It's the first result. We click on trapezoid. So by default in our CSS, we have this occurring. That's why we don't see the headline and many of the other elements. Here's the value and the property down there. Now we want to animate it to, because we're using the to method, this value right here. So we copy that, and then we come down and back to our HTML, and we just we put that in right there. We get rid of that semicolon. And we're also going to, if you look in the CSS, we have opacity 0. So we have to bring the opacity back to 1 as well. So we put a comma there, opacity, and let me hit Control B to get rid of that sidebar. Opacity 1. All right. Also, we were transforming it on the y-axis. Transform, translate y 100 pixels. So we have to put y. We don't have to put the transform property. These are shorthands built in within GSAP. Although you could put transform and then translate, whatever. But y makes much more sense. It's much more simple. We'll put 0, and then duration we're going to make slightly longer, 2.2. Now let's see if this actually works now if we save it. So I'm going to go back here and refresh. What's the problem here? Why is it not having a smooth animation and it's just going to the final state? It was confusing me, and I realized that we have to put in percentage values for the zeros that were shown up in here. So 0, percentage. Save it, and this time it should work. There you go. Very nice and smooth. And the reason it's nice and smooth like that, it kind of starts out like that, is because we're using Power 4 in out. So I would suggest changing this ease property based on some of those examples in their easing documentation that we just looked at. All right, so next up after that, we're going to have the form. The form's going to show in. It's kind of important to make sure the form shows up quickly because it is the primary call to action. So definitely makes sense there. We're also, if we don't put a semicolon at the end, we can just emit the TL.to or to the TL and just put in the method so we can chain the methods. So we're going to say to, and the next one is a form. And again, this is a clip path property that we're going to be animating exactly the same way. So we're going to take this, put it there as well, and we'll put opacity 1, and y will be 1. Everything will be exactly the same essentially. So y, and this is going to be 0, and y 0. And then also we're going to put in this part is new to you possibly. This section is an offset. So in the third parameter, the offset is going to be, it's going to control you. It's going to, well, actually, let's leave it without it, and I'll just show you what happens here real quickly. Let's just save this, go back. Notice how long it took for that form to show up. We don't want that. So we want it to occur quicker. So we put in the third parameter right here. We put colons or semicolons, and we put in this case, we want it to happen faster than it would normally because it only completes after this has been fully completed. So we put in negative because we want to subtract time equals, and then we put 2 seconds. So it's going to start only 0.2 seconds after this one. So it's going to be quick. If you wanted to add time, you put plus, but of course we do not want to do that. So now if we save it and we go back, look at that. It happens almost instantaneously, but you could tell this does start first. Now, one thing that's strange, I put Y0, I just realized here in my reference code, but it's not moving because I haven't transformed it. So let's see if we transform this form in exactly the same way. So if I take that and I put there, now maybe it'll look a little bit, there we go. That's better. Okay. All right, so we're rocking, we're moving along, and let's continue on. So for the next one, we're gonna take our cards specifically. And this time we're gonna use from, all right? So we're gonna use from, and we're gonna put in our card. That's those 4 little cards that show up. And we're going to take and say scale Y is 0, stagger. Now stagger is a new property, and this stagger property simply says if it finds multiple elements with the card class, then we're gonna stagger them. We're not gonna start them all at the same time. We're gonna stagger them based on the value that we specify for it. So we're gonna say 0.2 seconds. In fact, let me remove that and I'll show you the difference real quick. So this also, we're gonna make it start negative equal 2 seconds. So we're gonna make it start 2 seconds sooner than it would normally. So, all right, so notice how they're all coming in at the same time. So if we wanted them to be a little bit more interesting, stagger 0.2, look at that. Very cool stuff. All right, so, and by the way, you might be wondering how exactly are we getting these little circles to follow, these little lines right here? Well, that's essentially because it's a pseudo element of before, and it's positioned absolute based on the relative container. And so it says top, the top is a certain value, and we're scaling this whole card, which has a border left property right here. So it just stays right at the top. Very cool, and it doesn't get squashed either. Awesome. All right, so now we're also going to take our flagpoles themselves. All right, and remember we defined that selector right here. So we put from flagpoles. Now this is where the little circles come into play. So the flagpoles, we're going to put stagger 1, opacity 0, and now remember we're going from these values. Transform, and well, actually, why am I doing that? Why not just put Y? I'm looking at my reference code, and we're going to say 100 here. So they're going to come from 100 pixels down from where they normally would by default, and then they're going to rise up. And then we're going to make that one start negative 2 seconds. So let's see if this works. That's not how I was anticipating it looking. Let me try overriding this value right here to see if that makes any difference at all. There they go. Wonder why that wasn't working normally. Oh well, no big deal. Awesome. All right, so now we have to actually show the card content. All right, so another thing that we can do, I haven't showed you yet, is you can add multiple selectors. So title and description. So you just put a comma in between them. So that's going to target each title and description of our cards. These are nested values inside of the card class. So then we're going to put in stagger 0.1, very short stagger. Duration is 1.2. And of course, all these values, I had to experiment with them. That's really important to understand. If you get your animation timing incorrect, even just slightly, it can just throw off the flow of the layout or the animation sequence. Opacity 1 and Y 0. And again, negative 2. So now let's try that. Oh, that's nice. So when you're working in sequence animations together, of course, you don't want to do too many. You don't want to have too many things happening at the same time. It really looks cool though. I love it. All right. And then finally one more. We're going to have our footer just come in. So We're gonna put 2, and we're gonna put footer. So we're just, in this case, we're not using a class. We're just taking the actual HTML element called footer, and we're just saying opacity 1. We're not doing anything crazy here, and that's coming in 2 seconds sooner than it would normally. So now we can go back, and there we go. Awesome stuff. Now, of course, this is also responsive. I tested it out on my phone, and it works quite well. Look at that. Awesome, awesome stuff. All right, everybody, hopefully you found that interesting. And I just know GSAP is very fun to play with because it makes it easy to create animations rather than doing it by scratch in CSS. So if you enjoyed that, make sure to subscribe up. Make sure to check out DesignCourse.com/CSS. For our interactive upcoming CSS course. Also skillforum.io, where you're going to be able to learn, or not learn, but be able to teach people anything essentially, especially design and code. And I will see you all soon. Goodbye.